Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Because Football podcast. This is your host, Andrew. Today, our guest is Will Bonell of Hull, England. Will is the founder of Trebon Football Sports Agency and has been operating as a football agent. So, Will, first of all, thank you for being on the podcast and welcome.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to ask this question to start out and really get a sense of some of your background. Like, what's your earliest memory of football?
There's a couple and they kind of merge into one because it's all from the same kind of time frame. I'm a massive Manchester United fan, and there's a game that sticks out in my memory where United won. It was either 5-1 or 6-1. That's how well it sticks out. But it was one of the two. I had it on cassette, actually, and Dwight York scored a hat-trick. So that was one of them, and that's really the first team that I fell in love with, and the first United squad that I fell in love with. And then there's another memory of a player called Laurie Dudfield who scored a diving header for my local team, Hull City, when they were in the old Division 3. So those are really the two ones that stick out for me.
For the Dudfield header, were you in the stands that day?
Yeah, I was there.
Unbelievable. So cool. Awesome. So brilliant. I can identify, I think we're like similar generations, or some of my earliest memories of seeing football on TV was actually, funny enough, the New York Yankees had a TV channel and they used to play United highlights. Like I guess they made a partnership with like Man U TV in like the early 2000s, late 90s. So it was like the Dwight York, Andy Cole, obviously Beckham, Giggsy, Scholes, like those guys were some of the early ones. But then when I really started following, it was like Rude was my guy, and then Ronaldo, and then we kind of went on from there. So we have some shared. So give us some of like the milestones that kind of led you from that Laurie Dudfield header, at age 8, 9, whatever it was, in the stands at Hull, to now, recently going public and launching your own agency.
Obviously, around that age, it's everyone's dream to be a professional footballer. And it was probably a dream I think I hung on to maybe a little bit too long. It's only really now doing what I do where you look back and realize just the levels that are there and just how far off you were. But yeah, that was it. I was just really consumed by football, playing it, watching it, just absolutely loved it. And obviously, I was very spoiled at the time following Man United because the team was great and there was always competing at the top end of things. So it was inspirational in a lot of ways, and enjoyable, and playing. I think going through school and growing up playing football, it really secures a group of friends that you keep for life. I think it's a really helpful tool in that respect. So yeah, I tried to be a professional player, and my parents gave me all the support that they could possibly give me to sort of fulfill that. So I was playing, I was going to soccer schools, and my dad actually took over the local team to keep it going, because otherwise it was going to fold. And then my brother came in to coach it and stuff. So consequently, I started week in, week out, which was which was nice. And then, yeah, I got older into sort of mid to late teens, and it dawned on me that I wasn't going to be a football player. And then I sort of fell out of football a little bit in terms of playing it. I've always watched it, but I didn't get the same enjoyment from watching it. The team started to deteriorate a little bit as well. And I was at that stage of my life very into my music and things. I was playing a bit of guitar, and then that was the next kind of dream for me to follow, I guess. And the next failure to overcome.
Yeah, man. In the long road. I got a question before we get into the music part, right? Is having like dad, and then you said your brother was coaching as well?
Yeah, because my dad, with the greatest will in the world, he took over the team to keep it going because obviously I loved it and it was important for the community. But he didn't like football before I was born. So I was almost his football influence. So as a consequence,
interesting.
As a consequence, his coaching methods were outdated somewhat. But my brother, my brother was a good player, and he did his coaching badges and things like that. So when he came on board, the whole outfit became a little bit more professional, if you like. We did really well, like within the context of, Sunday Football League kind of thing.
Yeah.
We did really well. We punched well above our weight for a long time. And you know what? Some of the fondest memories are looking back.
Yeah, I can resonate too, like you said, of those earlier years of football, forming friendships and things, and like the memories you have. And then I still think now of, all right, who are the people that I keep in touch with? And the majority I played football with at some point, some as far back as being, 10, 11 years old. And then you have the moments of like, okay, we played together when we were 10 and now it's men's league, Sunday league, and we're in our 30s and moving around and whether it's that or high school, like for us, high school, and then playing in university, like it's just become such a huge part of your day to day. And so, the fact you build those relationships and bonds with people is such a special thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. All right, so let's get back to the music, and that again, you're putting the expectation on yourself to like make it big. That's going to be the lifestyle. That's going to how you're
This is
kind of
it.
to live, and then like you said, the challenges that came with it.
For sure. I mean, it was, in a lot of ways, I think it was almost a complete rejection of everything that my life had been to that point, because obviously before then, it's all about football, it's about being fit, it's about being an athlete, and those are the people that, when you're young and impressionable, like I was, those are the people that I was looking up to and trying to emulate. And certainly when you got into your teenage years, and certainly for me, when I'd not really found who I was as a person yet, a lot of what I was trying to be was who I thought was cool, or that I was trying to emulate people that aspiring to be like. So for a long time that was football, and then obviously that gravitated more towards music and that kind of lifestyle for a time, which was infinitely less healthy, unfortunately, physically and spiritually. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of fond memories that came from that. I had the opportunity to join a band, which, I was playing guitar and I thought I could string a couple of songs together. And then, yeah, the opportunity came up and I joined this band, and I was the rhythm guitarist and the singer. And we wrote some good songs which sound pretty good recorded, but I was really held back by my inability on a guitar and the inability to sing. Unfortunately.
The
But
basics, right? The fundamentals.
yeah. But I mean, looking back on it, because I spent so much time playing and singing, but you look back like with hindsight, and I was only doing things, I got so far and then I was just repeating things I knew how to do. And I was never actually putting the time into improving and getting better at those aspects. So it was a lot of time misspent in a lot of ways. Although I enjoyed doing it, but I wasn't improving, because if I couldn't do something, rather than working out how to do it and putting the time in to learn how to do it, I'd just stop and do something that I could do. And I think that was an aspect that held me back. And I think it's an aspect and a character trait that held me back generally for quite a long time. Just staying sort of within that comfort zone and not put the effort in to get out of it. But the problem was, again, I was young and impressionable, but I was also kind of lost as to who I was. And the beauty of being in something like a band is it gives you like an external identity, which you can sort of fall back on when you maybe haven't discovered who you are. And I certainly did that. So, I've got all these inspirations and I was trying to sort of live out the cliche lifestyle, and I was sort of priding myself on going to as many parties as possible and
Right.
be perceived as that. And because that's what I thought was cool at the time. And my, my health is deteriorating from that, and my mental health is deteriorating from that. But all this time, I'm not really too sure on who I am. And then there comes a point where the band ends and the other members go off to university. Then the one sort of crutch that had become your identity is taken away with nothing. And that was really the toughest part for me, because then you just go from being, hi, I'm Will, I'm in a band, to hi, I'm Will, and I know about as much as you do.
Yeah. What does that mean, right? And
Yeah.
you mentioned kind of like a crutch, or kind of like that shield you have of that identity. And it seems like it's something you've really reflected on a lot and really been able to dissect.
Well, I had to, really, because it had got to a point, and I mean, I don't say this to try and make it into something that it wasn't, or, elevate it. There's a million people that have suffered a million times worse than I have. But, just within my own sort of perception and perspective of things at the time, it was a really dark place because my lifestyle wasn't good. So immediately you're putting yourself in a position where you're constantly in regret, and you're feeling rubbish just generally, and you start getting paranoid and anxious, and And it got to the point where I thought that was a burden on everybody around me. And
Mm,
because I was still unsure of myself, I had multiple different friendship groups. Obviously, the people that I'd grown up with, and then there's maybe people that I'd met at work and people that I'd met through music, and they were all kind of separate. And then I was
right.
probably fluctuating between all these groups, going to whatever parties I could go to, getting involved in crazier and crazier situations, and just feeling that I was annoying everyone and I was a different person at all of these different scenarios.
Yeah.
Then I just sort of came to a point where I thought, can't carry on like this, but what's the solution to it? And in my mind at the time, I remember it really vividly actually, because it was like I thought I need to hit master reset. And how can I do that?
Mm,
I think that the first thing to solve was the relationships and my feeling that I was a burden on pretty much everyone that I was
yeah.
involved with. So I just kind of decided, right, I'm going to leave my phone and I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to organize anything. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to see what comes to me. And then in theory, they're the people that I matter to. And lo and behold, it's the oldest friendship group that you had that are reaching out. And bear in mind, they don't know that any of this was going on. They probably, I don't know if
Yeah.
today.
Can I jump in real quick? Like,
Sure.
because I feel like fortunately it's something that is getting more. We're able to talk about it. I think men in particular like have a hard time talking about like the shit that's
Mm,
really going through our minds and it's on our hearts because it's
sure.
like one of the main things as a man you don't want to appear as is being weak
Yeah.
or maybe unsure. And then, like you're saying, you're changing yourself with all these groups and you're doing
Mm,
things to be accepted when you don't
yes.
have any like kind of like strength and consistency in yourself.
Mm.
So it sounds like at this time, all these things you also felt like a shame and like you weren't able to communicate. Not only were you suffering, but did you feel like you had people to reach out to, or is this kind of where this older friend group came in?
I never discussed it. Like it was a completely internal battle, and I kept it to
Mm,
myself, and I probably hid it pretty well as well. And I think, I mean, I've been quite open with them after the fact. Although I don't know, many of them probably still don't know that I actually went through this process of waiting to see what came to me, and that they were the ones that did. But yeah, definitely as I was going through it, I kept it to myself, and it's only sort of after the facts where I'm at the other side now, where yeah, they've kind of realized that that's how I was at the time.
what was kind of like the process? I know when we talk about it, it's always like it's easy, somewhat easy, or we want to boil things down to like this one aha moment or this one thing happened. And often it's really like a process that probably continues to, if I'm like resonating with a lot of things you're saying and think about similar process myself, it's still like a day-to-day thing where you're introspective and trying to get a sense of who you are as life throws different stuff at you. Maybe it was a little bit of that turnaround for you, and where did you find yourself putting your energies and things like more, let's say, constructively, more healthily?
For sure. Well, you're right. It was completely incremental. That was the first step. Solving the relationships was the first step, because you wouldn't believe the feeling of just relief, elation that that group of people are still there and they've come to you. And it was just a really, really important moment for me, really, because that's when I knew that I do matter to people, and that, they do want me around. And those are the ones that are important to me. They've sorted me out, and it's not built on anything fake or wrong. They know who I am.
Sure.
They've seen that transformation. So, it was really, really important. I'm very lucky that I've got that group of friends that did that, and, without even knowing that they did it as well. And I think the next stage from there was just a very slow series of replacing bad decisions with good decisions and bad habits with good habits, and really trying to consciously better myself, and being fortunate to meet people at the time that I met them when I was ready to meet them, and then coming across influences at the right time when the message was resonating with me,
Mm,
and I was able to sort of take it on board, and that's when I really started discovering what I was about and what I stood for and what I didn't stand for, and ultimately what I wanted to do. And I met my girlfriend when I was 22, and that was that was probably the where I saw the biggest self-growth, because that's when I started realizing what mattered and what didn't matter. And I stopped being so interested in going out all the time. And I just you know, when you make a meaningful relationship like that and you realize, okay, this is how I want to spend my life now, and this is who I want to build my life with. I then came across certain influences, and I think the biggest impact was from one called David Goggins, actually. Have you heard of David Goggins?
Stay
Yeah,
hard. Stay
that's what
hard.
I read
Yeah,
his.
man. I was just reading his book this summer. He was like somebody who, if I was watching from afar, like that dude's nuts. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to do
Yeah,
anything. And then
yeah.
I think because I had such a like a resistance and a repulsion, I was like, okay, maybe I should check this guy out a bit.
I was listening to it, and then I just felt at the end of it like I could run through walls. And it just really, what it does is it opens your mind to the fact of how much you're actually leaving on the table. And then from hearing that message, it inspired me to start and get going with it. But then it's the discipline that it teaches to actually keep at it, because the benefits that you get when you're motivated is fleeting. Motivation is fleeting. And if you're going to get
100%.
kind of benefit from it, you need to be
Yeah.
consistent with it. You can't go to the gym once and build muscle, and you can't go to one language lesson and learn a language. You've got to stick at it and deal with being rubbish. And eventually you look back in 6, 12 months time and you're a completely different person to where you were before. So that it started by getting up a little bit earlier and getting into daily exercise, and that becoming part of my routine. And then that replaced smoking for me, which was massive. Going from there to being right, okay, now I want to be the first one that gets into work. So my first win of the day is getting up in the morning and going to the gym. Then my second competition is being the first one into work. And no one even knows they're in competition against me, but I do.
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah.
that's the sort of mindset that I adopted with it. And then before you know it, I'm getting up at sort of 4:30 in the morning. I'm going to the gym, and then I'm learning Spanish, and then all these things start to come. And you know, before reading that book or listening to that book as I did, if I'd have been told this is going to be your routine in a couple of years' time,
Mm-hmm.
no chance.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but now it is, and it feels comfortable, but it happens incrementally. You can't go straight into that because it would just
Yeah.
be. But then, yeah, you just slowly build to it, and you realize what you're capable of and what you can do and what you want to do. And then, yeah, you just kind of adopt it. As long as you stick at it, it gets easy. It becomes just routine.
Yeah, it's so interesting you're bringing that up because it's something I've been thinking a lot of lately, and I'm curious. And there's a voice in my head where it's like, all right, it's because football. Get to the football here. But I
Yeah,
think this is such a valuable conversation that is absolutely relevant to your role as an agent of
for
really building
sure.
relationships with players and really identifying people that you want to work with. And obviously, I'm sure has lifted your personal and mental game to the point where you can be in this position, you know, from where you were a few years ago. The thing that I am always really trying to discern, because I think we probably have some similarities of being competitive, you know, of having played football. And then we came to a place where we realized we weren't going to make the grade in that. And for me, and like, it was a big part of identity. Like you went from that to music.
Mhm.
I ironically did kind of like similarly in a little sense as well.
Right.
And then, yeah, there was a period of like, where it started like kind of just as fun in high school with my friends, like rapping and making mixtapes and
Nice,
stuff. And
nice,
then
nice. Yeah,
I did a little bit of that into college and really just kind of became like a fun thing. But I
yeah,
did put one project out,
nice.
which you can probably find on YouTube somewhere. And that was just like the artistic creative process with Big Two. But with the Goggins part, I think like his story is incredible. And when you actually read it, you start to understand a little bit more nuance to it. And he has like such credibility because of his life and where he's kind of moved himself to. But I always feel like there's such a fine line. And I wonder if this is something you can resonate with of like the, of trying to better yourself, right? And improve and having higher standards for yourself, and where that intersects with like shame and regret and like the voice that tells you you're not worthy. Because you mentioned earlier, like when you just left your phone alone and you stopped seeking things out and you just waited to see kind of what was going to come to you. You had felt at the time like, you know, just trouble connecting with people or not sure of who you were yourself. Those friends reaching out like was a sign that you had worth and value, that you didn't have to keep proving yourself. And so it's always something I think about. It's such a fine line of like, having a vision and wanting to develop yourself and what's required to actually do it, and realizing that like, okay, my present self, I have to find where I do have value and I am, I can be loved. All these like really deep psychological things that at the end of the day, all humans are managing, whether we're conscious of it or not. And also like, I've got to kick my own ass because I'm not good in this certain area and I need to get better. Like, you think it's possible to manage? Does that line of thinking resonate with you at all?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think for me now, it's something that, say, for example, if I miss a day at the gym, that internal monologue is really, really harsh on me. It's not saying things like you're worthless anymore. It's just saying things like, come on, you could have done that, and that that was a lazy decision. It's a lot more reasonable,
Yeah.
if you see what I mean. And I think that's just because I think it's just a product of replacing bad habits with good ones. And then when you know that you're doing the best that you can, if you start skipping it, if you let your discipline drop for a day, you've still got that feeling that it sort of eats away at you, that you know that you've missed it and you know that you should have done it. But the internal monologue itself is just a lot more reasonable. It's just like, come on, you're better than that, rather than
Yeah.
being.
What I'm hearing too in your answer is like, it shifts the focus on like who you like are to like what you're doing, right? So it's not that like you are worthless because you missed a day at the gym. It's just, okay, you didn't do that. You could. So it's like that action, that behavior. It's not quite as deep seated as like the shame of like you are bad or you're not
So,
worth it. So I feel like it's always an interesting give and take, of like who you want to be and why you want to get to that point, and then where you are at the current stage.
but at the same time as well, going to the gym hasn't ever been my identity either. Like I'm not going there to be the best athlete or to be a bodybuilder or to. In fact, in the weirdest way, I see it as part of being the best football agent that I can be. Because from a professional standpoint, I think to be at your best, you need to feel as good as you can and be as healthy as you can and as fit as you can. But there's a line, because I can't spend all my time doing that because the main goal is professional. So it's just knowing that going consistently an hour and a half a day, even 45 minutes, if that's all the time that you've got, but doing something, getting that heart rate going and working out is just, and the discipline of getting yourself up and doing it. Because I heard somewhere how you do one thing is how you do everything. And that's kind of, it's a rule that I try and keep in my head all the time.
Yeah.
So if I see something that needs to be done, rather than like half-assing it or ignoring it or putting it off, I try and get it done straight away, do it well, because if I don't do that well, then I'm prepared to let my standards slip somewhere else as well.
Yeah.
I might walk past a job that needs doing and ignore it, and then that voice is there going, "You've just ignored that, haven't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I have. Yeah, you're gonna go back." Yeah, I'm gonna go back. Yeah, and then so that kind of governs me now. If it's not possible to exercise, or if I just feel that tired in the morning that I can't do it, it's not this like explosion of shame and hate and things like that, because that's not my identity. I know that I should have done it, and I know that whatever excuse I tell myself at the time, it was a lazy decision not to do it within reason. I mean, that you've got to value sleep as well, and especially if you're trying to get
Yeah.
up at 4 every day, you've got to get to bed at 9. And if you don't, if I'm out at a football match or something, I'm back late, it would not be healthy for me to go to bed at 10:30, 11, 11:30, and then try and do that. So I've just got to reframe things at that point.
Yeah. All right. So we're turning things around. Goggins has got you with a new kind of sense of yourself. Where does that kind of lead you to getting into the football industry and specifically as an agent?
So football agency has been something that's always like intrigued me from becoming aware of it. Because even when I was young, I was always into business and things as well. I mean, I was one of those guys that used to sell like Kit Kats and stuff at school. So like I was always like,
Hustler.
yeah. But and like I always thought people walking around in suits was cool and stuff like that. So it's always been something that resonated with me. And then yeah, like the business of football, certainly when the playing wasn't an option, that's something that I really thought it marries together everything that I love. Because I've always been in sales, like high pressured sales environments and meeting people,
Okay.
business and negotiation and all these things are things that I've done professionally from being 18 years old. So there's a lot of transferable skills there. But the biggest barrier to football agency is knowing how to get involved in it. And for the longest time, I just didn't have a clue how that would happen. And before April last year, there was no barrier to entry. So what you would do is you'd pay £500 to the FA.
Mm-hmm.
You was a football agent, and that's
Mm.
how it worked. And funnily enough, that was the biggest barrier of entry for me because I thought I haven't got a football background, so I hold absolutely no respect or status within the game.
Credibility, right? Yeah, like you're not saying like, "Hey, look at what I've done." Yeah, you had
Yeah.
to build that.
So how do I just go and pay £500, say I'm a football agent, and get any credibility from that? So then FIFA announced that they were bringing in a license, and you had to go do an exam. And that was what prompted me to go, right, this is it. There's an exam. I'll go do the exam. I will earn the license rather than pay for the license. And even if it makes no difference from a practical standpoint, at least it's vindication to me. And yeah, I mean, and for the longest time as well, I think you've got these dreams and potential ambitions that maybe don't quite seem real, more of a pipe dream. And you keep coming up with excuses why not to do it. Well, this has to happen first. And then if this happens, then I can do
Yeah,
it. But when it comes down to it, you've just got to do it. So
100%.
I was in the right mindset at the time when they announced that they were going to introduce the license to go, right, okay, that's it. That's what I did. I went and passed the license, which was, I imagine, I didn't get my results. Well, I didn't get the exact scores. I imagine it was by the skin of my teeth. It was tough. It was really, really tough. And then,
What
yeah.
could I interject real quick? Like, could you give us a general idea? What are some of those things you're being tested on? Is it like FA regulations? I imagine. Like, what are the things you have to know to be to
Yeah,
be a
it's
football
exactly
agent?
that. FIFA regulations, yeah. So you had to get the knowledge of how, how everything works, the laws of the game, and then representation contracts, what you can do, what you can't do, when players are allowed to go to international duty or are obligated to go to international
Okay.
unless there's certain circumstances and stuff. I think it was like 20 questions, multiple choice, and open book. So you've got your
Mm,
materials with you. You've got a multiple choice of answers, so you're not having to write anything. It's just circling the right one.
yeah.
Sounds so easy, doesn't it? But it just wasn't, like the way that it's worded, and sometimes it's tick one or more and something like that.
Mm,
So yeah, it was really tough, and I was certain that I'd failed. I was really deflated about it. But then yeah, I got the email through to say that I'd got the license, and it was just it was real elation, like genuine
yeah.
elation. It was great thing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, that's one step, right? You pass the exam, but then
Mm.
you still have to create that credibility because at the end of the day, it's can you convince a player to like sign on with you, right? But it's also then you have to, so there's that like personal connection there and proving you're competent and have the skills that are necessary to like help them have a better career. And then you've got to be able to get it done with the clubs. I imagine like having a big personal network's important. So then you had the license, you had that sort of credibility, but you still had a long way to go.
Absolutely, but the thing with getting the license was it proves the methodology. So the work that you put in, the sticking at it, the discipline to actually make sure that you're committing an hour, 2 hours a day to the studying and then getting the result from it, it proves the methodology. So you just reapply that to the next step that you need to take. So yeah, it was about then growing the network and trying to establish credibility and just learn how it works, because with all the will in the world, learning all those things in the textbooks has had no practical impact on actually
Yeah.
performing the role. And
Mm-hmm.
much of the information, if you ask me about it now, I have absolutely no knowledge of, but fortunately I can search for it if it ever comes up. But yeah, in terms of practicality, you don't use any of it, which is the same with any role and any qualification you could do.
Yeah.
You've got to pass all this theory, and then in practice it's of no use to you. But yeah, I just started reaching out on LinkedIn, and obviously I sought as much information as I could, the do's, the don'ts, and then I went and did all the don'ts anyway, because obviously I was going to be the one that would be different and it would work for me.
Yeah, man. Yep. Hard-headed
So yeah,
much.
sometimes I come across a few old messages that I've sent, and I'm like, oh, good grief, but it is what it is. It's all part of the learning curve. And then the opportunity to join Astra Partners came up, which is perfect because then I've got these experienced people to learn from, a really good team
Mm-hmm.
to learn from, who have been in the game quite a long time. They have footballing backgrounds as well, so a different perspective to me. I'm coming from sales and business, and they're coming from football and then football business. So there's a lot of crossover and a lot of transferable skills, but just the intricacies of how football works and how to build relationships with people in that specific sense.
I think if we get into a little bit of the perception of agents now in modern football, they're kind of like an easy scapegoat. It's they're the ones driving up transfer fees, all of this. Then FIFA through the course, and I think there are some other measures. You can refresh my memory on of FIFA trying to like regulate, but also limit influence of agents. And we know about certain. Could you kind of like explain some of the role of the agent, how they kind of function within the football industry that we're maybe not getting on the blogs and like the front or the back pages of the newspapers?
In my professional career, I've gone from being a telesales agent to an estate agent to a football agent. So I'm perfectly used to being hated by on site by the majority.
The public flax nothing for you.
Definitely something that needed regulation, 100%. Like the fact that FIFA took the steps to regulate it was necessary and much too late, probably, because it's an incredibly important role, especially for young players, but players throughout the career. Players need to concentrate on being the best footballers that they can be. But there's so much else to do with football in terms of on the pitch, off the pitch, preparation, then commercial, and all these other elements that are involved that are, without an agent, are distracting the player from their primary objective. So it's a really important role, but especially when there's no barrier to entry, you can imagine you get all kinds of people there.
Yep.
It was very, very important that they did regulate that. How they did it, there's a lot of people more experienced than me that have had a problem with it. For me, I didn't know any different, so it was fine.
Right.
There's a lot of people whose businesses were riding on passing this exam, which is probably wrong, isn't it? If they've been operating for maybe 7 years or something, livelihood, and if they fail this exam, they're not qualified to do it anymore. There was probably some way that they could take into account years of service and body of work to
exactly
get that, which they didn't. Agents are a misunderstood role, certainly from the general public just watching football, because you see them and they're involved in these dealings, and you'll see them in the media like sort of agitating for a move for players and things like that, which is perceived negatively.
Exactly.
But the actual day-to-day role of an agent, you become almost an extended part of that player's family and inner circle, and they become an extended part of your family and inner circle, and you're in constant communication. And certainly with academy players, you're speaking with the player, you're speaking with the parents, you're speaking with the club, you're getting updates and reviews. You could probably speak to 100 agents that will give you 100 different answers on how they perceive their role. So I can only speak from personal experience and how my philosophy is always football first. And if I can help that player be the best footballer that they can be, everything else is going to fall into place. Rather than concentrating primarily on how much money can we get you, what club can we find you, what endorsements can we source, all these kind of things, my first priority is, what do you need to be the best football league? So then you break that down and think, right, so what are the elements that are in our control? Because this player can't choose how naturally strong they are or how naturally... There's so much of football that isn't within our control as a player. So if you want to reach your potential, you've got to take control of all the aspects that are within your control. So that's things like nutrition. Sports psychology is massive. You see a player that's playing in the flow state versus that same player that's made a few mistakes and has got in their own head. And if you can control your mind to get yourself more in the flow state on demand, or as close to as possible, and certainly not let mistakes get in your own head, that's massive. So I'm really big on sports psychology. I think it's a vital element to keep control of. So it's all these different elements that come together and sourcing the right people so that, like I said before, you can form a team within a team and you can help that player to be the best footballer that they can be. Because a lot of players are prepared to put in the work required, but an awful lot of players maybe lack the direction of just what that looks like. So if I as an agent can help and go, right, this is your routine, this is what the club needs to see from you, this is when you need to this is when you need to recover, and just then really help them maximize the time that they've got to be the best player that they can be. And then it's on them. In my opinion, I've done my job at that point because they know what is required, and then it's just up to them to deliver it. But if I can make their life as simple as possible, to follow those steps, then
100%.
I like to think that everything else will fall into place just by virtue of being a better footballer.
Like, what are some of the things that people might not necessarily think of different tasks that you've got, or types of conversations you're having, and things like around the player to support them so they can keep the football first?
I don't know if it's stuff that you probably wouldn't necessarily think of. Not certainly now that we're talking about it, it probably all would make sense. But it's generally things like organizing where they need to be, how they're going to get there, and things like that. Certainly, if you've got a young player that's maybe trialing at clubs and they're there for a few days, does the club have digs? If not, can we sort a hotel in a decent area like that? And obviously, if you're moving players, then it becomes a point of, right, where's that player going to live? Can you help them find somewhere that's decent to live, where they're not going to get in any bother? And sometimes the club will have something for that. Sometimes it might fall to the agent, but it's just making personally they've got everything that they need. But a lot of it is helping them sort of come to terms with whatever their situation is and what they can do to improve it. And often with footballers, and certainly in academy football, there's going to be issues around minutes and maybe not worrying about where the pathway is and things like that. And I think it's important for me with the players that I'm working with that they take accountability for their situation.
Yeah.
The easiest thing, and it's human nature, and I think we've all done it, but the easiest thing in the world is to, if you're not getting minutes, for example, you're naturally going to want to blame the coach or the tactics or, oh, well, there's something that's not your fault, that's not your responsibility, that is stopping you from getting the minutes that you deserve. And sometimes that might be the case, but if you take that approach, you remove any chance of learning from it and any chance of growing from it. Whereas if you look, okay, what's the problem? I'm not getting minutes. Right, what can I do about it? And then you open the door to loads of different lessons where you might be able to improve your game to change your situation. So that's an important conversation that I have with players. But for me, because it's so important that I'm dealing with players that are prepared to do that, that's a conversation that I'm having at recruitment stage.
Yeah.
Not a conversation that, in order for me to recruit a player, they've bought into that already. That's their type of character.
Yeah, and that was, you like literally were preempting my question, because I was like, yeah, so how are you trying to find the right fit, right? Because there's an element of player ultimately has to sign, the agreement with you to be represented by you, but obviously you want people that are the right fit. And I know from our conversations, you're saying those values of discipline, of hard work, of accountability, of consistency. That means you're forming really deep relationships as well. So what's your vision for your agency, Trebon? Is it kind of—
Sure. So for me, like Trebon Sports, my ultimate vision I see as being a real disruptor to these big agents. That's what I want to be. The principles that it's built on, and the principles you mentioned there, the discipline, hard work, accountability, and consistency. Those are the disciplines that changed my life. They're the ones that got me out of being in a real place of despair to becoming someone that I can genuinely be proud of. And the beauty of those principles is that they're totally transferable to anything that you're trying to achieve. It doesn't matter if you're trying to be a footballer or a football agent, or if you're trying to be a tennis player or a businessman or an actor, anything that you're trying to do, if you apply those principles and you're consistent with it and you're giving absolutely everything, in my mind, you can't fail, because at the very least, you will have reached your potential and you can look back and be proud of that. And for me, that's what I wanted to build Trebon on. It was really important from a branding perspective, because when you look at all the football agencies out there, they are a business first, and they are governed by the financial necessities of being a business. They need to make money. And when you look at the players they represent, all these big agents still have world-class players that are at the top of the game, and they'll also represent players in the National League. And that's great, that's fine. But along with that, they'll represent all characters as well, all creeds, all colours, just all players of all types. Because the main question for a football agency as a business is, can this player make us money? That's ultimately the aim of the game. Whereas for me, the question I'm asking when I'm recruiting a player is, what does working with this player say about us? And vice versa, what does working with us say about the player? So really, if you was to ask me what my target number one for Trebon Sports was, it's actually building a brand that's built on those principles, where the players become the face of that brand, and they're every day they're showing up. They're the hardest working players in the team. They're the hardest working players on a game day. They're disciplined. They have got that reputation for being the model professional. And it's the players that are going to build the brand, not me. They're the face of it. They're the ones that are going to go and live it in the public eye. And my dream and the target that I am aiming for is one day one of my players ends up on a shortlist at a club, and there's maybe 5 players on that shortlist. And by virtue of being signed with Trebon Sports and what that brand means, that influences the decision makers at that, because they can look at Trebon Sports, they can see that I'm the agent, and I want them to know exactly what they're going to get from me. I'm going to go about my work in a prompt manner. I'm going to be on time. I'm going to be communicative. I'm going to be fair, well-reasoned, well-researched. It's going to be an enjoyable experience to have to deal with myself, but also they can then look at the players and they know exactly what kind of character they're going to get. They're going to get the model professional. They're going to be accountable. They're going to want to learn. They're going to want to be the best player that they can be. And that's the dream. When I'm influencing decision makers at clubs just by virtue of being Trebon Sports and what that means as a brand, that's the dream. That's the target.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful image you put forth there of like that kind of being your indicator of success, right? Of just like the reputation and integrity you guys have. I guess I'm going to push back a little bit though, because I appreciate the values you're coming from, and the idea being like the goal being okay that all those things are going to lead to that like financial success for the player, because at the end of the day they've got families and things to feed. So what does that look like then, where the player is doing all these things and you feel like they've had a good season, but you're just not able to get that move or that contract? Like those are tough conversations, right? And that's where all of this talk and these values really get tested.
Sure. And it's always case by case in those scenarios, because you can't predict what will happen and what you might miss out on. And you can only do your best to mitigate against these risks and to manage expectations as well. Because if I go to a player and go, you do this, you do that, you follow these principles as I tell you to do it, I'll get you to Real Madrid. And if I do that and it's not happening, then that's my fault for being so optimistic about what's achievable. So for me, I've got to manage the player's expectation. They've got to understand what the possibilities are, but also what the potential pitfalls are and potential negatives, and what might work and what might not work. That it's for them to understand that things aren't always going to go the way that we want. Again, this comes down to why I want a group of like-minded people to work with. Because I think once you're in this mindset of trying to better yourself and be disciplined, and you're following these messages and you're embodying these principles, negatives and setbacks and rejection and problems are almost something to celebrate. Like in my mind now, I'm surrounded by rejection. I get rejected by players that I'd like to represent all the time, because it's the nature of the game. It's competitive. But then that's a stepping stone. It's a necessity to have that, because then I can reflect on it and see what went right and what went wrong and where I can improve for next time. That rejection is a step closer to where I want to be. And it's the same for everyone else. Like, your successes prove your methodology. Your rejection, your setbacks, your mistakes, they give you something else. They're another thing to be celebrated, because you can look at them and go, right, okay, I got that wrong. Right, let's not do that again. Or where will I go next time? Or I didn't actually put that point across very well.
Interesting, and like kind of a brave point you make of those things that we would maybe on the face of it see as a negative, a setback and rejection, just not necessarily being a stop sign or a roadblock, but just kind of a speed bump maybe, and just an option, a way to learn and kind of keep going. And I think what you said of having these conversations on the outset with players, and really being on the same page. But I imagine that these are the type of conversations, and even some of the things you're saying, like everybody knows you got to work hard. Everyone who's ever kicked the football's coach has said you got to work hard, you got to play hard, all those things. So that is pretty straightforward for everybody and their professional, or aspiring to be professional footballers. With the nature of these conversations and your values, you're kind of like whittling down and making it a more difficult job to find representatives, right? It's like you're saying, the typical agent is going to be more open, but for you, it becomes even more of a, let's say, a challenge, which obviously you relish. But how do you start to like build some of those relationships and look forward? Can you get any sense of just watching a player on the pitch and their body language? Do you think it takes, actual face-to-face? Is it talking to people they know? Like, how are you starting to create some of these relationships?
My business model is a terrible business model because yeah, you may be excluding 70% of the pool of people
from the get-go,
which is why it doesn't make sense, which is fine. But for me, I see it as a passion project, not as a business. I'm certain it will become successful. Like, I'm so sure of it, and it will become successful in the way that I envision it. But it will do so in its own time when it makes sense to, organically, by sticking to the principles rather than. And that might mean that I'm sat in front of a player that I know for a fact can make me money, but I have to walk away with it because it's not right for the brand. But I think the biggest indication when you're speaking to a player face to face is how they describe what they do and how they do it and the mindset. And I think there's nothing that can beat your own intuition on that, because everybody thinks that they work hard, whether they're a footballer or not. Everyone thinks that they work hard.
Yeah.
But if you actually drill down into it, who's actually working hard, it would be a very different. Like, if people were completely honest and they look within, just like I had to do, and you realize just how much you're leaving on the table. And you can tell the ones that aren't leaving anything on the table generally just by speaking to them. Determining the players to work with, though, my first indicator is what are they as a character rather than who they are as a talent, how they're perceived as a talent. If you think of Cristiano Ronaldo and you've got two columns of talent and work ethic, and he's probably 99 at both. And then you might look at a Jordan Henderson, who's maybe 96 on the work ethic and maybe closer to 85 in terms of talent, and you become like a mean average of that. And I would always take the player that's got the work ethic section in the 90s, because you can't wake up and decide to be as talented as Cristiano Ronaldo, but you can wake up and decide to work as hard as him. And those are the people that I feel I can get the most from. But they'll get the most out of me as well. When you're surrounded by like-minded people and like-minded characters, you push each other to that next level. Because I might wake up one morning and not quite feel up for it and think, right, you know what? I might not go to the gym today, or I might not. Do I need to practice Spanish for half an hour this morning? I can just let that go. I'll do something else. And then I'll see one of my players have just gone for a run, or they're in the gym, or they're doing something. And I'm like, no, and there's a competitive element to that, and there's an element of not wanting to let them down. And certainly because this is my vision and this is the thing that I'm telling anyone that will listen, I've got to lead by example and fulfill that, because if I don't, the whole thing will crumble.
Yeah, the like-minded people are, iron sharpens iron of you're kind of supporting each other in those conversations. And it's like, as a player, they've got someone who not only has a similar mindset, but is there to kind of walk alongside them to support them. And then you as an agent have somebody that is literally putting it out there on the pitch. It's something you can see. It's so easy. That's one thing that makes football so like ruthless as a business, because it's so transparent in terms of that performance and everything. It's so clear. So it's a really awesome to talk to you about this. I feel like probably some people will be like, I didn't expect an agent to speak like that and maybe have those certain values. It's not exactly I'm not saying that the mainstream perception is truth. Obviously there's always shades of it, but certainly get to know you, your story, and kind of your vision and goals. We look forward to following with. I'm going to put, of course, your LinkedIn up there, so anybody who wants to connect can be in touch with you. But before we let you go, Will, got to have you answer this question for us. This is a question we ask everybody who's on the podcast, but could you finish the sentence, because football?
Because football is everything.
All right. Succinct, straight to the point. Yeah. Encompassing. Can agree with you, man. It's, Will, thank you so much, man, for your transparency, for sharing, for being open and vulnerable with us. It was great conversations. We even snuck a little bit of football in there for the audience, but no, it was brilliant. And yeah, we'll keep connected with you and hope to follow up in 6, 12 months, 18 months and see see how things are progressing for Trebon. But thanks so much for being on, and everybody else watching and listening wherever you are. Thank you guys very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.